Welcome to Pursuing Justice. I'm Harriet Hendel, and for the last few podcasts, we have been talking about a conviction review unit that is here in Florida, and we have had the state attorney as our guest, and now we are welcoming back the director, the executive director of that unit, Teresa Hall. Welcome, Teresa, to the program again.
No, thank you so much. It's glad to be here.
Good. All right. So today we want to kind of wrap things up about the unit itself, but maybe delve deeper into some of the reasons that contribute, or some of the factors that contribute to someone going to prison, especially a case like Robert Dubois, a man who spent 37 years behind bars for a crime that he did not commit. And I would think that the average person would say, well, how is that even possible? So there were factors in his case, and I wonder if you could separate out those factors and explain in very specific detail what they are and how they contributed to his case, and then possibly go over his case from the beginning to the end for us, because you certainly know his case very, very well, I'm sure.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, there are some common causes that lead to wrongful convictions. Now, in Robert Dubois' case, they weren't all of these that I'm mentioning, but there was more than one that led to his wrongful conviction. But some of the ones that don't go to Robert's case include false confessions. Mm-hmm. Everybody, I can talk to people that are strong-willed and independent lawyers, and they look at me and they go, how can anybody confess to a crime they didn't commit? And unfortunately, the people that typically do confess to crimes they didn't commit are younger individuals. They're typically maybe even teenagers. They're more submissive, or they're a follower. They're not necessarily a real independent thinker. And they will bow to that peer pressure. And because the brain is not as developed in a teenager and science has completely shown this, they will bow to that peer pressure because all they want to do is get out of the situation of being interrogated by 2 or 3 police detectives or people of authority. And so they'll say whatever they need to say to get out of the situation. And that has led to false confessions. I think right now we're staying at about 14% of the wrongful convictions have a false confession embedded in them. Other causes include cross-racial misidentification. There are several psychological and sociological studies out there that show that people of one race don't typically make good identifications of another race. And that has led to issues with misidentification. And then we've got, leading into some of the ones that are related to Robert Dubois' case, one is what I would call junk science. This is where, at some point, someone testified as an expert and basically gave their opinion on something that has not been scientifically proven at all. In Robert's case, it was bite mark evidence, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes when I talk about, because that is the crux of the wrongful conviction. Mm-hmm. So junk science, or science that is outdated and been found not to be reliable, is a problem. Hair comparisons under a microscope is another one that's fallen by the wayside, where there are many people that had been convicted based off of that kind of analysis, and now it's been determined that it's not really scientifically sound at all. And so that's an example. We've also got issues with what we call prosecutorial misconduct, or law enforcement misconduct. And this is where you've got people that don't turn over the evidence that they're supposed to, or they really fall into that confirmation bias. And so they're convinced they've got the right guy, and they don't look at other evidence that clearly proves they don't. They dismiss it because it doesn't fit with what they think. And that leads to wrongful convictions. And I believe that was part of the problem in Robert's case as well. And then lastly, we deal with sometimes we deal with ineffective assistance of counsel from the defense attorney. In Robert's case, I don't believe that was the situation, but that does happen. Someone's just not very good at their defense, at being a defense attorney, and they don't present the evidence that really was staring them in the face to the jury, which could lead to a wrongful conviction. And so those are some of the most common reasons. And as I said, I'll give some examples. Oh, I'm sorry. The last one is jailhouse informants.
I was just going to mention that.
Thank you. Yeah. Jailhouse informants, which also was key in Robert's case. This is, when I talk about a jailhouse informant, this is someone that's in jail for something completely not related to the murder. Let's say it's a murder investigation. They're in jail, they're not related to that crime at all, but they share a cell with the guy that's been charged with murder. And then there are now alleged conversations between the informant and the defendant who is charged with the murder, where the defendant makes confessional statements. He says, well, I did it, or he gives facts that show he did it. So then that jailhouse informant contacts the police and says, hey, man, give me a good deal on my case and I'll be a witness against this guy. So they're using the information they gained, if it's even truthful, they're using the information that's gained to try to get a better deal for themselves. So they're saving their own skin, basically. And that is a real problem. And we just finished creating a policy about just urging attorneys not to necessarily use those kinds of informants, but if you do, there's a strict criteria that you have to go through to be able to use them.
And shouldn't the jury know when a jailhouse snitch gets up on the stand that is where the information is coming from?
Absolutely. The jury should know that, but the jury should also know how many times has this guy done this? Mm-hmm. What has he received as the benefit? I mean, in Robert's case, for example, the jailhouse informant, he was facing 2 life sentences. And because of his testimony, he got 14 months in prison. Mm. Now, that's a huge incentive. If I were facing life, I'd think about lying too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happened.
But when I read about things like this, jailhouse snitches, and I've read about so many cases where they are a key factor, why is it that they are used in a trial?
Well, that's hard. That's a little harder for me to answer because I won't use them. We took the policy when I was a homicide supervisor in Indianapolis that we would not use them. I think some of the reasons that prosecutors will use them is because maybe their case isn't as strong as they wished it were. And now they've got this guy that's kind of handing them something on a platter. And so it's easy.
I see.
I mean, I don't use them. I don't advocate to use them. When I was a homicide prosecutor, I would not use them. I would not file cases based off of them. And I would not use them at trial because I can tell you over 19 years, I've never seen anything really good come out of using one.
And yet they are used often, right?
Yes.
They are. All right. So now we went through all of those factors. Did you mention, well, you mentioned cross-racial identification. What about just witness misidentification? Is that a common factor?
Well, sure, it absolutely can be. I mean, if you think about it, especially if it's a stranger that's hurting you or attacking you, you have never seen this person. They've got a gun in your face, or they're sexually assaulting you. You are already in a horribly traumatic event, and to then be able to recognize a stranger later in some kind of photo array is not always that easy to do. And if it is a cross-racial identification, that even makes it harder to do. Because how long did you have a chance to see the person's face? Were you concentrating on the weapon that was being used? Were you trying not to look in their face because he was raping you? I mean, that happens, that happens a lot. You'll have women that'll say, I looked away because they didn't want to make eye contact with the person that was hurting them. And so you have to take all those factors into play if it's a stranger on stranger attack.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, so Robert Dubois' case, can you kind of paint a picture of how when this began and the accusations against him and what happened all the years that he was behind bars?
Sure. In August of 1983, a woman by the initials BG was attacked as she was walking home at night. She was put behind a building, brutally beaten to death with 2x4s, beaten so bad that her face was completely disfigured, and she was raped as well. And when the autopsy occurred, the doctor that performed the autopsy, he saw an injury on her left cheek that he thought was a human bite mark. They called in a regular dentist. He took some pictures of photographs, and again, remember, 1983, they were Polaroids. That's how bad these photographs were. Took some photographs of the injury, and then the doctor, the pathologist, took it upon himself to cut out the wound and put it in formaldehyde to preserve it. And because they thought that was a bite mark, they brought in an expert that is called a forensic odontologist. He looked at the excised wound, said, I don't really know for sure exactly what this is. He looked at the photographs and he said, yes, this is a human bite mark. He taught the detectives how to take beeswax and have people bite down into the beeswax to get some kind of dental impression. He then was given a bunch of dental impressions where these police officers basically just asked anybody on the street that lived in the neighborhood that was a man to bite into this beeswax. He then, out of about 100 of them, he said, oh, wait, this guy matches the bite mark. And it was Robert Dubois. That was the only evidence. That was it. And keeping in mind, in 1983, Ted Bundy was still fresh especially in Florida, still fresh in people's minds. And if you'll recall, a lot of the evidence where he was convicted, some of it was based on bite mark evidence. Matter of fact, it was the same forensic odontologist that testified in Ted Bundy's case that worked on Robert's case. And so Robert was arrested. He was in jail. While he was in jail, a jailhouse informant contacted the police and said that Robert had made incriminating statements that he had had sex with the girl, but he didn't kill her. And so at trial, the only evidence that was given to the jury was the bite mark evidence and then this jailhouse informant. And the jury convicted Robert of murder. At the time, it was the jury found that he should serve life in prison. The judge took it upon himself to sentence him to death. 2 years later, the Florida Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that, and changed the sentence to life in prison without parole. And so then that's Robert was in prison. Fast forward all the way to, I'm not sure exactly when the National Innocence Project took on the case, but in March, I'm going to get my dates mixed up, but I believe it was in March of 2019, I received some information from the National Innocence Project about looking into the case. No, I'm sorry, August. I think it was August of 2019. And I began reviewing 3,000 pages worth of trial transcripts and depositions and trying to learn everything I could about